Hello, Culture Matters podcast. Here's a quote before I introduce you to our guest. Spend each day trying to be a little wiser than you were when you woke up. Charlie Munger, our guest today, friend of the Culture Matters podcast, the one and only No BS Bill Mervin is back on the Culture Matters podcast. Our mortgage advisor, a leader in his industry, one of the small percentage that in the tougher times is making dimes, helping us build our wealth through the power of home ownership, investment, real estate, and so much more. Staple in the Culture Matters podcast. We've got some crazy times in the last few weeks as it relates to the markets and whether the dream of home ownership is was ever a dream, or has it been a nightmare all along? These are the questions we're going to ask Bill, along with what is a tariff, and does that impact us everyday people outside of social media hysteria? But long intro longer. Thanks for coming back to the Culture Matters podcast, Bill, and thanks for staying in business.
Thank you, Jay. Yeah. Well, yeah. Yeah, of course. That's got to do that. I been fighting the fight and we're seeing some uptick in total origination, so things are good.
Munger said, "You don't see who's swimming naked till the tide goes out." First thoughts?
Well, you're seeing that. You're seeing lots of people swimming with no bathing suit the last couple years, 2020 and 2021. The market covered up a lot of sins from a lot of people thought they were something special. And last couple years has weeded a lot of that out. So you're seeing, and I mean, I don't want to overdo it. Say I love this type of environment, but they're necessary because it weeds out, uh, you know, in the industry as the competition, and for the clients, it weeds out a lot of the um, the weaker folks in the industry. And then when the market does turn, of course, there's less people. You're able to gain market share if you're doing a good job. And then eventually in the seventh or eighth inning, the knuckleheads will come rushing back in, and it'll all start over.
Charlie Munger once said, "To get what you want, you have to deserve what you want. The world not yet crazy enough place, is not yet a crazy enough place to reward a whole bunch of undeserving people." Thoughts?
Read the first part of it again. You have to be crazy enough to get what you
To
want. You have to what?
deserve what you want.
Y-
Yep. To get
Yeah,
what you want, you have to deserve what you want. The world is not yet crazy enough, is not yet a crazy enough place to reward a whole bunch of undeserving people.
well, thank God for that. Yeah, no, I mean, I think there's two, I see it as like two distinct thoughts. I talk to my kids all the time about it, and some of the guys on my team, early on in your path to success, um, there's a natural feeling to get overly excited about, your wins, and for me, like early, like looking down, perhaps not that I've ever walked on a tightrope, but what I imagine it's like, and then it's like you're doing fine until you look down and you're like, oh man, I'm gonna, can I fall from this place? And I think that, talking about being crazy enough, I guess good enough for what you deserve. You have to be in the mindset that you deserve these things, right? Because if it seems like, oh wow, this is so great, I can't believe I did it, then I think naturally your body acts as if it's in a place it shouldn't be. And then, I had to work on that mindset, right?
Hmm.
Where you get to like, no, this isn't extraordinary. This isn't, luck. This is deserved because I'm bringing value. And then that mindset, you start to embody it, and then that becomes the normal, and the expected for you. So, but yeah, I mean, the markets have a way to the second part of it, they've got a way to snuff out the pretenders, right? And I haven't met anybody good enough, smart enough, sharp enough to fool the market on a long-term basis and make a lot of money legitimately without driving a lot of value. So,
When the markets were going crazy the last 2 weeks or something, what was the first few thoughts that went through your head?
first few thoughts that went through my head. Um, I don't know. My thoughts are still evolving on it. It's, this is
Because
uncharted
the
waters.
the leader of the country, from my understanding, help me if I'm
Yeah.
not grasping this effectively, but it may was ultimately saying to other countries, you're going to pay more money to do business with us. And the market reacted to that.
Yeah, I mean, that's, I guess, the result of the tariffs that he put into place. I think the message was that countries, and in particular China, have been, treating the US unfairly in trade deals, and therefore, running huge, in their case, trade surpluses, and in our case, trade deficits with the United States. And unless and until that's corrected, you're going to pay more. And I think ultimately the objective was to strike deals that would, rectify those imbalances.
If America was a potential borrower, would they be qualified for a home loan based on the
uh,
current what's owed versus
yeah. Well, I mean, they would just because they have the printing press. But their debt ratio doesn't look too great. But then
like,
again,
is it good enough debt ratio to get a house?
no, I don't think any of I can't think of a country, well, maybe certain isolated incidences, if there's some oil wealth or something like that. But, I think this is just the crazy world that we live in with these insane budget deficits and, so on and so forth. But, back on the tariffs, you know, im- I think they have to, I think while I was just listening to this pretty interesting take on it. China's at the heart of all of it, right? I mean, they uh have been really, a, is pariah the word? Um, I mean, they're like, it's like Walmart, but on a global scale, right? Where you come in and then you just make stuff cheaper than everybody else, and then you push everybody out of business. They've been, and they're just thieves. They steal intellectual property. They'll let like what they did to Uber. They let Uber in and just long enough to be able to copy, learn all their technology, learn everything. And then the structure, the business, the ad placements, everything. And then they hand it all to, a Chinese tech company. And then they basically make sure that that company has their blessing and becomes successful, and then they
And
run.
don't they own it? They own
Yeah,
shares in a lot of
yeah,
these
and
companies.
then yeah, I mean, yes, they'll own shares in it. They'll there's a very gray line between private and public in the Communist Party, and then and then it's like if you don't think it's fair, you can take them to Chinese court, but that's just a kangaroo court. It's a joke. Um, so yeah, I mean so I think that I feel like that even though there's definitely
Oh,
other unfair trade deals, that mostly I think he wants to bring these other guys to the table to make deals, and then ultimately use that as leverage against China, which is I think the main target in all this.
so interesting. If the audience or even yourself, have you ever heard of Stephen Kotkin?
No, I have not.
There's some amazing interviews. He comes on the Hoover Institute every year, here and there with this wonderful interviewer who just slipped my mind. But the Hoover Institute, Stephen Kotkin, StephenKotkin, I believe. I have this, it's on my wish list to get into. It's a 3 volume series. The third isn't out yet. It's like a whole summer just to read this book on Stalin. But you said something that made me think. Stephen Kotkin, Stalin, a monumental achievement. Its biography on an epic scale. Only Tolstoy might have matched it. John Lewis Gates said that. But it's this beautiful book. But when asked to, Stephen Kotkin says no one's read more deeply, apparently, the files on the Soviet, like the Russian files through all the archives and like Stephen Kotkin, wonderful teacher, speaker, lecturer, and student of the Soviet Union. And they asked him, what's if you could bottle down to like a sentence explaining um, the USSR and all that, and he said they were communists. And it was like, because meaning they really believed, they really believed, they believed in Lenin philosophy. They believed in Marxist Leninism. They believed they were communists. I don't know where that's coming from, but when you mentioned China and the tension, the power of belief, the culture war that we're in, the war of the West.
I don't know enough
They
about
believed.
Russia, but I don't
I
feel
don't know either because I haven't read this.
I don't think that the China is particularly, I don't know that they're that ideologically pure when it comes to communism. I think they're opportunists and they're authoritarians. Authoritarian, authoritarian.
Authoritarian, yeah.
Yeah, and it's just about control. But the bottom, they're still completely their domestic, so demand doesn't would not keep them around. Right? So at the end of the day, we have a lot of leverage, but we need more leverage. This guy was saying, they're not built if they're not built for if one person says, okay, we're going to stop buying your cheap crap, right? They'll focus on striking deals with some of the other, markets that are deeper. But, if collectively, quote, we came together, and essentially, stop buying it, their crap, it would just kind of cripple them. And their whole system is built on them keeping power. And in order to keep power, they need to keep people working. It's why they have these ghost cities and all that they build just to, all will grow into it over time. And it's just, they just keep stimulating the economy. But yeah, no, I just think that, I think that's the, back to my original point. I think that they're the real target uh with these tariffs, because I think if you can, I think that a lot of places are negotiating with the Trump team. And then I think that I think he'll probably strike a few deals with some bigger players, and then use those initial deals to, springboard and kind of build some momentum.
What
Uh,
could this mean for homeownership?
well, I mean, I guess it depends on what camp you're in. I do think that it's going to create some pain in the economy in the short run. Now, you might say that we had a good economy and that this is all self-inflicted wound. Or you could be in the camp that believes that, the whole global trading system has been, really stacked against the US for a long time, and that this is necessary, and that anytime you mix something up to this level, it's going to create some pain. But I don't think there's any question that it's disruptive. Um, if it is, if the results of it are moderate pain, I think I think in most markets it'll be neutral to supportive of prices, because it will um it will I think any reduction in demand that comes from less jobs, I think, would be offset by increased demand through lower interest rates if we really hit, a recession. Um, and then I think that the increase in building costs would then constrain supply. So I feel like it would either be net neutral or uh, positive for home prices. Now, if you're a buyer, it's not a good thing, but if you're a owner or a investor, different story. I do think that in that environment, that speculative markets, and um, coastal, more kind of second home markets, things like that, they'll take some bullets in a in a negative recessionary type situation. Now, if a worst case scenario happens and like the wheels just totally come off, then, I think then you could see some, if jobs were really, if we saw significant job losses, I think eventually the pressure from that outweighs those other factors I mentioned, and it could be it could be negative for housing in the short term.
How many homes roughly is the country behind on?
That is a great question. I don't know the answer to that question. I do know that I'll just use the two extremes, right? I believe that, oh geez, I used to have it at the tip of my fingers, but I think we had around 4 million, 2006, right? The housing bubble. I think we were running at about 4 million homes on the market. And, we've spent the better part of 2 or 3 years with just bouncing around a million. So that's a 75% reduction in homes for sale. But I'm not up on the kind of deficit, if you will, of total homes. I know that, we're right now, at the same time that we're falling behind in new homes being built, we're also got one of the biggest generations, since the baby boomers kind of coming online into that first time buyer time frame. So you've got increased demand at a time where we've had, um, chronic shortages of under development.
But how much of that is offset, if at all? Because isn't it true at some degree that the younger generation isn't buying like past generations did? And like, or is that only, or is that, could that data be influenced by the fact that there, if there's less homes, there'd be less, or I guess new homes would be less purchases, but I guess, no, I don't know if you know the data on that or anything.
Well, I think that was
Isn't it true that the younger people aren't, or
the
they're doing it
thought for a
later?
while, but I don't know that that's holding up anymore. I think that that generation, and I get it mixed up to be honest, whether it's the millennials or the Z's, but they've I think, in the last couple years, that generation that was kind of sitting on the sidelines has kind of stepped in, and I don't think they quite make up the largest buying group, but I think they're up, they're up, they're starting to take a bigger piece. So I don't think that the American dream and the dream of home ownership is going anywhere.
What about wealth inequality?
Uh, I mean, I'm more concerned about
How's that impacting housing?
I don't know if it's the wealth inequality. I mean, I'm not a believer that wealth inequality in itself is a problem. I mean, does the gap between the wealthiest and the, you know, lower 10% matter if the lower 10% are also wealthier? So I mean, I'm not a believer that there's a problem necessarily with the so-called wealth gap or wealth inequality,
But
but
what if I don't like the fact that they're just so much richer than me?
well then, yeah, I mean, I think you should protest and, yeah.
So it says here, yes, Gen Z is buying houses, though challenges like high interest rates and the cost of living make it more difficult. While they represent a small portion of current home buyers, around 4%, many Gen Z individuals are actively saving and expressing a strong desire to own homes. They are also more likely to prioritize homeownership as a financial goal than previous generations. Bro, and it says Renford. By the way, I'm reading this on the internet on AI, so of course it's got to be correct.
It's true.
Um, it says here on Redfin data shows that Gen Z home ownership rates are outpacing those of millennials
Yeah.
and Gen X at the same age. For example, 24-year-old Gen Zers had a home ownership rate of 27.8% in 2023, exceeding rates for millennials and Gen X when they were the same age.
I mean, that seems pretty bullish for housing to me.
Why,
Um,
why, why would Gen Z all of a sudden 65% are eager to buy homes, ideally within the next 5 years?
that doesn't sound like they want to live in their parents' basement, does it?
Well,
Uh,
is that because their older sibling is already in there?
yeah, and they got to get out.
I
Yeah,
don't understand.
I mean, I'm more concerned. I'm not concerned about wealth. Like I said, if it's
Well, wait, maybe they can't stay in their parents' basements if 60% of the population is divorced. There are no parents.
that's true as well.
Like, first of all, there's a war, there's a culture war in the sense that, East versus West. There's different. There's if the nuclear family is, how do you say it, imploding as a consequence to the death of God and the the steady integration of our frontal lobes and these social media platforms, um, then there aren't any homes to stay in because a home isn't just what I owe the bank or my right or my name on property. It's the people that make it meaningful. Mom, dad, you know, brother, sister, grandpa, grandma.
Well, that's my worldview.
But if that's not a worldview that people are, if I look at the divorce rates, 60%, even if people, our culture says they believe in family, what they're saying
Hmm.
and what they think isn't actually what's happening. Now, one could argue, I guess, okay, if 60% divorce, well, maybe a large, I don't know the numbers on this, 80% remarry, then okay, there's a new family or a different family dynamic. But then I heard there's some statistic I could look it up here in a minute that a very large percentage of those that divorce do it again. So
Yeah.
it's almost like how many CEOs are going to change
Well, I don't think these Gen
the
Zers are
company before the employees are like, this culture sucks. We keep having
they're,
new leadership in here. The
they're
children
still
are like,
idealistic, and I don't think that when 24 they're thinking that. So perhaps they, are still do want the white picket fence.
it says Gen Z is showing an interest in customizing their homes and is more likely to prioritize home ownership as a financial goal.
Sounds good to me. What is it? Between 19 and 26. Okay.
It says Gen Z is more likely to be found in Midwestern and Southern cities, says an analyst by CoreLogic.
Yeah, so I think that it's
I
I rather than the wealth gap, I'm very concerned about the, cost of living.
Why?
Because I think that, it's eating people alive, the inflation rate, I think. I mean, it's just these incomes are not keeping up with inflation. Most people don't own assets, and it's like boiling a frog in water.
It says the median home price in the United States is currently 419,200. This represents the midpoint. The average sales price is 510,300.
New homes. Yeah.
New homes as of Q4 2024. How much is that greater than it was 5 or 10 years ago?
I think it's probably about double,
Mm.
just since I think probably 2019. And if you Google that, I think I'd be surprised if it wasn't in like the low mid 200s.
And what's behind that? Yeah. 2019, the median home price in US was 258,000.
That's a 60% increase, roughly.
How
Um,
could how could people keep up with a 60% increase in 6 years?
and they can't. I mean, the amount of money, the percentage of people's income that's going to housing right now is insane. Um, I don't know. I don't know what's going to give, to be honest, just because it's something's got to give.
Well,
Uh,
it seems like the if that's happening, it's like if this was a business, the business is running as efficiently. It's like what's better, or if our employees don't have upward mobility, and then what's the likelihood that they're going to stay working for the company, or what's the likelihood that whether they like it or not, what's and how does that impact whether they want to leave the company or not? Like the company was a country, right? Stay in the country, leave the country. What psychological and interpersonal, like familial impact does a company have on its employees when they don't know what the vision is, they don't know the mission, they don't believe there's prospects for career development and advancement? How does that affect their their ability to show up for their families, for their communities, or their ability to show up for themselves as like an individual, right? To be aspire to something greater. Well, it doesn't. So what does that do? That creates anxiety. And then, well, they either would want to leave the company or they would want to maybe take over the company. So I
Hmm.
think if you don't want to leave the country, then you might want to just change the whole thing. And so clearly there's internal issues with this company, this culture, this country. If productivity and if the productivity and performance of the employees in it isn't keeping up with the the cost of their life of what it takes to have a life, and that's a scary prospect because what could that lead to? Now maybe that brings us to the beginning of the conversation about this idea of like the current CEO of the company, aka the president of the country, and what they may or may not be attempting to do as it relates to these other countries internationally. Because if citizens of the US are the employees, then who are the customers? Well, it's how we serve the whole world. I'm like making this thought experiment up as I go here, but there you have the business, you have your employees, but the purpose of the business is to serve, is to create and keep a customer. Peter Drucker. We got to create a customer, and we have to keep it. So how do we actually create customers? That's gross domestic product. It's like it's it's what job it's value, like you said, it's value creation,
Yeah.
right? What is value creation? It's like harvesting resources and distributing resources. Well, there's resources that we have in the US, and there's resource that we can give out domestically, internationally. There's resources that we don't have in the US that we've got to bring in, right? So it's coming in and going out. And something about how this company is doing business with other companies globally may or may not be impacting how productive, like how, right? So I don't know, just how much of this is an inside versus outside game, or is it that's the whole complexity of the world? It's both, it's inside and outside. If our values are misaligned as a nation as a consequence of our vision and our mission being unclear, because a serious percentage of the population do not believe in the company's story. Like they don't like that the company was even started. Like the idea of revisionist history or the 1619 project, like all of these are, it's like a bunch of people in the company that say, hey, Coca-Cola was created. It should have never been created because Coca-Cola isn't healthy for you. We don't want to work at Coca-Cola anymore. We're not going to leave Coca-Cola. We're going to just change the company to a different product. We want to change the product.
And
We
by
want
the
to
way,
change the
Coca-Cola is
purpose.
racist.
Well, and that, well, this is, so that's a good point because, and even in those people's defense, if you stop believing the company and your life is hard, I mean, anything might stand out as something to get behind. That's what an ideology is. It's like an unformed truth that seems like the truth. Oh, that makes sense to me. I don't know, I went down a rabbit hole on that, but I guess
No,
like, yeah, what are your thoughts?
I mean, I think that it's, you know, I mean, there's probably a lot of factors at play, but the two that jump out, I mean, as it relates to the trade, yes. I mean, when other countries, companies, you know, put tariffs on our products, when other countries put, kind of shadow tariffs, but putting, limits on the amount of something that could be imported, etc., right? Then it's going to put American companies at a disadvantage. And so, Um, that's going to impact, demand for American workers, and that will impact their earning potential. But I mean, I really think the biggest culprit is, the absolutely unhinged, unchecked spending and borrowing that we're doing. It's just, it's only logical, despite whatever, the certain, uh, certain people and certain economic philosophies want to say about, how they look at money supply and how they look at, you know, um, the Federal Reserve and so on and so forth. But, you got the same amount of stuff and you got more dollars chasing those things, right? And at the end of the day, I think that's the biggest thing driving inflation. And it's been, you know, I think that's why, the current administration has caught so much, tailwind is just people, it doesn't matter. The Republicans run deficit spending on certain things, Democrats run it on different things, but at the end of the day, it's just the status quo, and these guys just continue to just run up the tab. Um, and I think until, somebody or something puts that in check, I just don't see, I don't see how you can, get this problem, you know,
That
moved.
I like where you're going with this because the way I look at the psychologically, the conservative versus liberal, I'm going to use classical terms, just out, outside, idea far left or right ideological extremes.
Yeah.
Conserve. What is let's look up what is conserve. I know we only have a few minutes, but this might be fun. The definition, what is, conserve definition. Protect.
Stay, yeah.
Okay. Something especially an environmental or culturally important place or thing, harm. So here's more definitions. Conserve. Physics, maintain quantity of such a mass, constant overall total, um, spread, jelly, that's so conserve, prevent the wasteful or harmful overuse. When I think conservative, I think past. Kierkegaard said life can only be understood backwards, but must be lived forwards. Conserve, we're looking at the past. It's, there's wisdom in looking in the rearview mirror, like, oh, that didn't work last time, or let's be careful of that. It's not necessarily cynicism or skepticism, but a form, pragmatism. We want to conserve our story of the company. Why were we founded? Why did this company start? Who started it? What were they looking to accomplish? How did they do it? What values did they represent that we could say our forefathers came before us, right? Like if I have a grandfather and a grandmother, where did they come from? What country? Why did they leave their origin to come here or go there? What were their beliefs? How did they live their life? What do being a grandson or a grandchild, how do my values line up to them? So when I think of conservative, I think, looking at the past and being past uh, rooted to make a stance for the present. When I think of liberal or the idea of, let's say, progress definition, Forward, onward, movement towards destination, progress, advancement, headway, passage. That to me is future. I could be so excited about what we can become as a company 10 years from now that I'm spending money on marketing. And my CFO is saying, dude, we don't have enough reserves in the kitty. Something could go wrong outside of our control. Like there's all these factors that we can't account for because we can't see the future. And you just keep spending. Yeah, but that's progress, right? Here's nouns or similar words: advancement, headway, passage, going, onward, progression, advance. What's the full meaning of progress? The process of gradually improving or getting nearer achieving, completing something. When I think of a progressive, I think of someone that's so focused, like the CEO that's like, I want to spend money on marketing and branding. And the CFO, more conservatively, is saying, but we only have this much money. Oh no, but borrow some more credit. Go to the bank, beg, borrow, steal. It's going to work. It's my intuition. It's my feeling. I'm the founder. I get it. And the conservative, now, of course, think about it. The CFO is not conservative. Then you have Enron. So where I'm going with this is if the progressive is that those with temperaments rooted in the future, that when it's taken too far, they're not thinking anything would go wrong to look at the past. Conservative could, temperamentally be looking in the rearview mirror and making, oh, this could go wrong, that could go wrong. Hey, the future is going to come, but let's be prepared for it. But what really is the present? It's an agglomeration of the past and the future happening all at once. And how we communicate, collaborate, cooperate. Like there's a different, if I look at this, progress is the process of gradually improving. There's a difference between a gradually improving and, what's the opposite of gradually?
Quickly.
Yeah, it's like, super fast, singularity, can't see. So I guess I brought all that up because when the past and the future can't communicate with one another, it's like an individual caught in a state of anxiety. The past has not been, the shadow has not been integrated, and there isn't a clear aim. And therefore, the present, there is no presence. There's just constant emotional reactivity in the face of the unknown. And there we have it. We have two political persuasions that don't exist without one another, because if you have only one, that is a tyranny, that lose their utility, and their utility, yeah, their meaning is negated in the absence of being able to feedback loop. Like it's like if I can't, anyway, so I've been thinking about this a lot. Uh the value, the necessity of both the progressive and the reflective tendency. And yeah, the necessity of the progressive and the reflexive tendency. And what does it actually take? And look at, in a business context, the CEO and the COO and the CFO and the CTO, they all look at the health of the organization through their paradigm. And if they're not communicating in a constructive way, if they don't trust one another, if there isn't respect, they'll kill each other and the competition will beat that company. So what the hell is happening to our culture? We're getting beat. We're constantly fighting one another. Like it's horrible to watch. And like there's evil out there in the world. I've had my rose-colored glasses on most of my life because I didn't um I didn't know what my values were. And I don't know if America does know what their values are. If we know what our values are.
Well, I think it's part of it used to be that, you had two people with enough of a shared vision and values and just different ways of arriving at that goal. And then from that place, you know, while I might have pretty strong political leanings, I used to feel much more, I used to feel that the folks on the other side wanted generally the same end result. And therefore, they have one way of getting there, and I have another way of getting there, and that leaves room for um, cooperation, right? And like, kind of unpacking of those ideas to get the best of it and find compromise and get there. But I think part of the reason that things are the way they are right now is that the values are so diametrically opposed. There isn't a common ground. That one
I think
side
that's a good point.
is completely opposed to, and it's tough to find. It's not about whether or not you just want to dig in. You can't really find a common ground with that.
Well, I think this is interesting because I our values have a relationship with our identity. At the root of it's not politics, it's identity politics. One of the great ironies, though, of this, we have a Judeo-Christian culture. The way to relate to someone possessed. This is one of the ironies, in my opinion. The way in which one would relate to one that is possessed to exercise their possession. This would be an ideologically possessed person. Let's say caught up in it, as an example in identity politics, right? They don't have an identity rooted in, for example, a biological sex. Well, I would argue one of the ironies of this conversation, if we're going to talk from position conservative, Judeo-Christian culture, would be to be Christ-like with them. So to me, it's an irony because to to be Christ-like with an ideologically possessed person would be to love them, not to kill them, and also not to avoid them. So it's not compassion is how I'm using love, but to throw the table and tell the truth, to say what you think, to use the logos, to talk, to have the conversation. That's how I'm interpreting that. So one of the ironies I think of our Western culture is the abdication of responsibility, if it's Judeo-Christian rooted, in the face of the ideologically possessed, which is a simultaneous contradiction of the values of the Judeo-Christian foundation that I would, potentially has given permission through compassion and tolerance to ideology to run rampant. We're a tolerant society. Let's have compassion for the people that we don't agree with. We're going to put them in a camp and say, they're different. They're they're unwell. Let's put them over here, or let's ignore them. Let's put up with them by not acknowledging them. but that's not helping them. It's hiding from our responsibility. And now they grow, they grow in power, they grow in certainty. Well, how could they not? They see the Western culture living as hypocrites. How could they not want to tear down the foundations of the West? Because it has no meaning if it's not being lived, if it's not being stewarded, if it's not stewarding the values it says it believes. It's an abdication of responsibility, and it's proving the ideologically possessed right in its inaction and its rhetoric. So it's inaction and rhetoric. And I think that's a shame. Also scary because if everyone's possessed, then no one is living truth with a capital T, and everybody is just reacting to the state of anxiety and disjointedness of identity. Those, because identity is rooted, I'm sorry, our values have a relationship with our identity. So if I identify as a person of God, my individuality is tethered to a monotheistic religion, a monotheistic concept of the world. I believe in God. This is what I don't do. This is how I live. I believe it like in my head, in my words, and I'm acting it out. It's part of my identity. Take God out of the picture, my identity could change with the wind. So those are two different value systems. Like my values come from the what the yes, my beliefs lead to my thoughts, words, actions, habits, destiny. Gandhi. So it has to do with that belief. You take the belief out. God is dead. There's not enough water to wash away the blood. Nietzsche. All right, identity politics. There is no God. There are no gods. Truth is relative. Morality is relative. There are no borders. Subjective projection of possibility. Values are subjective. There because I don't have an identity rooted in a monotheistic religion. So don't tread on me. This is how I want to show up in the world and do this and do that. And this is what your kids need so that they can discover their identity, whether it's a fish or a tree or a cat or a caterpillar. It's who knows. And so that if that's their opinion, and then the Judeo-Christian camp, the monotheistic camp, their opinion is no, they're not a tree, they're not a cat, they're not a plant. They are made in the divine image of our creator. Those two opinions they need to be confronted with one another. But they're not. Both sides are saying that the other side is full. But I would ask the monotheistic, those in the monotheistic camp, what would what would our God say? And and I would look at the other camp and say, if you're the Ubermensch, how would the Ubermensch show up?
Well, that's a tall order, man. I definitely,
Thought we were going to talk about tariffs.
yeah, I fall into the camp of I can't talk to certain
Uh,
people because they're crazy. Um, you know, and but I don't know. It feels a little pointless or hopeless at times trying to, reconcile such divergent
well, maybe that's the lesson though. It's like Christ died for our sins because it's too tall of an order.
well, I think that you can love someone, and I think that you can, ultimately, when, I think that, it's a matter of like being able, being willing to help someone, to be kind and respectful, like in the real world situation, but simultaneously, not engage at like a deeper level because, there's, it's just they're too opposed to one another, like meaning it, there's certain people that I can talk to and I can treat kindly and, I wouldn't all like naturally see somebody with just what I would view say as crazy worldviews and I'm going to, not be kind, disrespectful, and be discourteous. But I think it often stops there. You know what I mean? Just because it feels like to try to connect on a deeper level and to try to, whether it's a
I
close
think
close friend or whether it's a significant other, or whether it's a business partner, I think I find it very hard to bridge that gap.
I think that's a good, place to end and say this. That I don't think it's up to, I don't know how much I think the responsibility of the leadership of any company, country, if at some point we make it to those positions of authority, influence, and power, the bar is raised to where like our example is what the everyday person models at whatever level that they are able to. And so like that we you know at an individual level, I guess in some sense, if one believes in free will, one can will themselves to attempt to go the extra mile, whatever that looks like for each individual. But ultimately our leaders of the world, of the free world, I think the battlegrounds are among them. And I guess I'm waiting patiently to see that leadership, nonpartisan. As Leo Tolstoy said, the two greatest warriors are patience and time.
I was gonna say hope you have a lot of patience.
If you're listening to this episode of the Culture Brothers podcast, I hope you enjoyed your edible. Share this with a friend who cares about things that are bigger than themselves, who still believes in human future. Pray for us. Leave us a review on the Culture Matters podcast. Bill, thanks for coming back, and we'll see you soon.
Always a pleasure.